Hello, everyone. Welcome to Joe the Lawyer. I'm your host, Joe Pometto. I promised everyone previously that I would cover the Derek Chauvin trial, and I have not covered very much of it. But now that the evidence and testimony phase of the trial is over, I'm going to do some analysis. I'm going to start off today with the doctors. And with the doctors, we're going to do a deep dive into causation and the law. The primary question being, did Derek Chauvin's actions cause the death of George Floyd? That is what all of these doctors that have testified at the trial have gone into. They've had different theories. Some of them have had the same theories. We're going to run through each of the doctors. We're going to unpack it a little bit. I do believe that this is a large portion of the trial, okay? Did the actions of Mr. Chauvin cause the death of George Floyd? And you will see at the end why I think that this issue is not as contentious as you may believe. I do believe it is contentious. However, I have a conclusion here, and I think that at least the doctors, the medical testimony is going to favor the prosecution. You'll see why at the end, but I think that the defense has an ace up its sleeve, which I will also reveal at the end. And that, I believe, is where they are going to need to focus in the closing arguments which are coming up on Monday. Thank you, everybody, for tuning in. I'm Joe the Lawyer, a practicing Pittsburgh criminal defense attorney. I also do personal injury and a whole bunch of other areas of law. I consider myself a trial attorney. I've done many trials. I've done jury trials. If you like my content, please like, subscribe, comment, and share. I would also say sign up for my newsletter or consider becoming a patron on Patreon. Every dollar that you donate allows me to have a nicer set. You can see things are changing here a little bit, and also allows me to dedicate time to making these videos. So we're going to start out today looking at the Derek Chauvin trial and the doctors. And I'm going to run through each one of the doctors who testified at the trial. Okay. So, whoops, I jumped ahead a little bit here. Oh, a little bit out of order. Oh, and before we begin, everyone, grab your cup, your glass. Cheers with me. It tastes better when we sip together. I'm changing it up a little bit. I'm moving to iced tea. It tastes better when we sip together. Cheers. Have a sip with me. Have a drink while we watch this, while we enjoy this analysis. Okay, absolutely delicious. So I believe this is the order that the doctors were called in the George Floyd trial. And I'm not going to go through, you all are familiar with the basic facts of the trial here, right? The police were called for a petty theft that George Floyd had committed at a convenience store. The police arrived on the scene in the course of trying to subdue and arrest Mr. Floyd as he was accused of this petty theft. He was eventually placed down on the ground in the prone position, which means face down on the ground, and several officers were on top of him, allegedly applying pressure. Derek Chauvin was what is considered the primary actor here, as the allegations are that he placed his knee on the neck of George Floyd for a total of 9 minutes, and this caused George Floyd's death. Well, let's see what the doctors say. In a trial, when you have someone who has died, okay, almost always you're going to have a medical examiner who is going to come in and testify as the cause of death, because in a trial, a lay person cannot testify to the cause of death. It has to be an expert. This is expert testimony. So somebody who is not trained in giving medical evidence can't come into a trial and say this person died for this reason. Has to be a doctor, has to be an expert. The prosecution, obviously, in this case, recognized that that is how this had to be done. So they actually called a whole parade of doctors. And I will get into the number and what that means as well. And the first doctor that they called was Dr. Bradford Langenfeld. He was the ER doctor who examined George Floyd, and declared him dead. Now, Dr. Langenfeld, during his testimony, testified that George Floyd died of cardiac arrest caused by a lack of oxygen, which can be stated as hypoxia. Now, Dr. Bradford Langford's testimony is very important because he was actually the first doctor to treat George Floyd, right? He arrived at the hospital. He had already been unresponsive for a period of time, and he is the ER doctor who examined him. So Dr. Bradford's testimony, this is somebody who was on the ground, okay, was the first doctor to see George Floyd. This was a snap photo of George Floyd that Dr. Bradford Langford sort of brought in and then gave his opinion about. The important thing here with Dr. Langenfeld, and I'll get into this a little bit more, is that he examined George Floyd and drew a conclusion likely long before the media coverage of this incident took off. So he will likely come off as more credible than some of the other doctors. Let's see who they are. Okay, Dr. Martin Tobin, the Irishman. This is the second doctor that number two, I'm not sure about the order. Don't kill me over the order here, all right? So the prosecution then called Dr. Martin Tobin. I call him the Irishman. Apparently he's an Irish doctor. He's got an Irish accent. I say it as a term of affection. Now, he's a pulmonologist and a critical care physician. He declared that the cause of death for George Floyd was cardiac arrest due to hypoxia. The cause of death was low level of oxygen and shallow breathing. Now, here's the interesting thing about Dr. Martin Tobin. He is basically a full-time expert witness. He's testified at over 50 different trials. He was not paid to testify in this case. He's not a paid expert. And many people say, well, this raises his credibility. But I think it could actually damage him because he may be viewed as too eager to come in and testify. And if that's the case, it means, well, maybe this doctor made up his mind and said, I want to be on this case because he drew a conclusion a little too quickly. Now, I don't know if the defense is going to argue that, but I would say that is something to watch out for if you watch the closing arguments. Dr. Tobin's testimony was widely acclaimed by people in the media. I do agree that his testimony was powerful, and he used imagery and description, and he said, I believe at one point, something along the lines of George Floyd was trying to breathe through his hands as he began to develop these cyclonic movements and the oxygen was drained through his body. So he gave extremely powerful testimony. He also used imagery where you could see the officers on top of George Floyd to drive home his point. He had a whole 3D image set out. So I agree that Dr. Tobin's testimony was very powerful. He said cardiac arrest due to hypoxia. But the defense, I think, and this is me coming purely from an attorney perspective, could paint this man as too eager. Most of the time, people are paid to come and testify. And because it's expected, here, him not doing it, while it may sort of raise his credibility, it may also damage his credibility. That's what I would argue as a defense attorney. I would say, look, this guy came in here, all right, and he was eager to share his opinion. And he put a lot of time into work in this. And yes, he wasn't paid, but that's because he had come to a conclusion in his mind, okay? And therefore, perhaps he has an axe to grind, a political point to make, and that is why he is here testifying. So while the media saw this individual as a very powerful witness, I actually don't see him that way. I think he's a bit of a double-edged sword. All right, let's take a look at one of the next doctors. Dr. Bill Smock, specialist in legal forensic medicine and a former ER doctor. So he's also sort of like a paid regular expert witness. But his testimony was very matter of fact. He said the cause of death, asphyxia, lack of oxygen, deprived of oxygen from pressure on his back. It's important there that the doctors draw the link between so putting a case together is like putting a puzzle together, right? Or connect the dots. So you literally have to connect all of the dots. And this doctor, I thought, did a good job on the part of the prosecution of saying that there was pressure on George Floyd's back. The pressure caused the lack of oxygen. The lack of oxygen caused the death. And if you believe from the actions, the jury believes that Derek Chauvin was the cause of the pressure, then that causal link, that logical link, could lead to his conviction. All right, let's take a look at the next doctor. Dr. Lindsey Thomas, just like Dr. Smock, the testimony came off with a bit less fanfare, but she was very matter-of-fact and to the point. She's a former county medical examiner. I believe she was the former county medical examiner of Hennepin County, which is the county where this case is taking place. She also said cause of death, asphyxia or low oxygen. She used the words subdual, restraint, and compression. Powerful, powerful language coming from Dr. Thomas, very favorable to the prosecution. Let's look at the next doctor. Now, this is another doctor, in my opinion, carries a lot of credibility like Dr. Langenfeld, and that is Dr. Andrew Baker. He's the current Hennepin County medical examination. He did the initial autopsy on George Floyd. So Dr. Langenfeld, ER doctor, first doctor to see him, only doctor, tried to bring him back to life. Now we have Dr. Andrew Baker. Again, first doctor to do an autopsy. He specifically stated, I'm not sure about Langenfeld, but I believe this is so, but Dr. Baker said he specifically did not view the video before he made his decision. That raises his credibility, right? Because he was not influenced by the media, the protests, maybe to a small degree, but the more important thing is he was not influenced by the video. And in the majority of the time that a medical examiner is making a decision on a cause of death, there's not going to be video, okay? There's not going to be video. He did not view it. Makes him very credible. I put here in my notes, he may be the most credible. He did not state asphyxia, did not state lack of oxygen. He called it cardiopulmonary from stress. So basically, the heart stopped. Cardiopulmonary, so a heart death from stress. Now, he did state that the restraint and the compression was the cause of the cardiopulmonary emergency. So most of the prosecution doctors are saying hypoxia, lack of oxygen, lack of oxygen. This doctor's a little bit different. He's saying cardiopulmonary, essentially a heart death, a cardiac death, but he also says that it's from the compression. So now the jury sort of will have options here with Dr. Andrew Baker and the other doctors. They can say, well, whether it was a lack of oxygen or whether it was cardiopulmonary, Baker and the prior doctors agree. Dr. Thomas, Dr. Smock, Dr. Tobin, they all agree that it was caused by the compression and the restraint, which again allows that logical chain to be drawn. The next defense witness, Dr. Jonathan Rich, he's a cardiologist at a hospital in Chicago. I thought he's a good witness. He gave good testimony. He's compelling, gives compelling testimony on the stand. Came off very good. He said cardiopulmonary arrest caused by low oxygen caused by the prone restraint. So, whoops, did not mean to do that. Let's go back. Caused by the prone restraint. So again, he's sort of connecting all the dots there. And like I said, the mixed theory of pressure and restraint causing lack of oxygen and or cardiopulmonary arrest caused George Floyd's death allows, again, the jury to draw all the lines. Okay. Now we get to the defense witness, Dr. David Fowler. He's a former medical examiner from Florida. Now, he stated cause of death, cardiac arrest caused by illicit drugs And he specifically stated it was not a lack of oxygen, does not mention lack of oxygen. He does mention fentanyl and methamphetamine and also some of the pre-existing heart conditions. George Floyd had pre-existing heart conditions. So this would go against the prosecution theory that the lack of oxygen from the knee caused George Floyd's death. Dr. David Fowler places the emphasis in his testimony on the illicit drugs and on the heart condition of Mr. Floyd. This is powerful. This was powerful testimony for the defense side and in favor of the defense. Okay, so let's talk a little bit about causation in the law. When a person is being accused of a crime or anything under the law, there are two ways. There's a two-step analysis to show causation. Remember, I told you you have to draw that logical chain, and one part of the chain is you have the action, then you have the cause, and you have a result. Action, cause, result. Does the action cause the result? In this causal analysis, there are two parts. There's legal cause and proximate cause. Legal cause is but for, which means but for the action of the defendant would the person's death have occurred. In this case, because we're doing it in a murder, okay, the result is murder. So, but for the person's action would the person have died. Or another way to state this is, if the person had not done this, would the person have lived? Was this the direct cause of the person's death? In this case, the but-for argument that the prosecution is making is, if he had not placed his knee, or if the restraint was not placed on Mr. Floyd, would he have still survived? This is sort of a 50-50 choice here when it comes to but-for. Now, I put on the next part there, if you look at the third bullet point down, the contribution theory of legal causation, which I spelled wrong. I spelled causation wrong. Good job, Joe. In the contribution theory of legal causation, there can be multiple causes. There can be multiple causes of death. However, if the contribution was large enough from the actor, that is enough to convict the individual, and that in contribution theory is accepted in the vast majority of jurisdictions. Let me give you a few scenarios here. Let's say you have two people who shoot at one person at the same time with guns. And the individual, let's say shooter A and shooter B. From shooter A, the individual takes 3 bullets. From shooter B, the individual takes 3 bullets. Are they both guilty of murder? Would a medical scientist be able to go in and say exactly which bullet killed him and exactly which bullet did not? Well, maybe that is possible. However, if they all entered the person's body at about the same time, okay, it's impossible to distinguish exactly which bullet killed him. Causation can be weird, isn't that? Don't you agree? Well, I can tell you through this contribution theory of legal causation, because it would be hard to use simply but for here where you have two shooters, because it's true if you took one shooter out, he may still have died. 1 bullet, 4 bullets here gets very confusing, okay? But through the contribution theory, both of those people would be convicted of murder. Both could be convicted of murder. Both could be, it could be said, caused the death of the person. And I think most people would accept that to be common sense and factually true. Okay, then you have proximate cause, which is a little bit different, right? You have legal cause and proximate cause. It's a two-step analysis for that causation, action, causation, result. Break down the causation, legal cause and proximate cause. Legal cause is the but for. Did it occur? Okay. Now we're talking about proximate cause, which has to do with foreseeability. Is it foreseeable? Is it reasonable? Is it logical to say that the person's action actually caused the death of the individual. If it was not foreseeable that such an action would cause the person's death, well, then you cannot be convicted of the crime or held liable for the tort or something in civil court. I'm trying to think. I should have came up with an analogy before I did this video, but let me give you something crazy here, right? Let's say you were walking down the street and someone left a knife on the street, okay? And you're walking and you don't see the knife and you slip on the knife and the knife shoots up in the air and boom, hits someone in the eye and they die. I mean, was that really foreseeable? Was that foreseeable? Could you have predicted that? What are the chances of that happening? Okay, the chances are extremely, extremely low. Okay, plus it was an accident, which is a little bit different. However, because the chances were so low, it's hard to say that it was foreseeable. Therefore, you wouldn't be the proximate cause. Another thing could be, one of the things that are interesting here in causation is, let's say somebody shoots somebody, but they don't die. They go into a coma for 6 months and they start to get better, okay? And then 5 years later, that wound that they got from the bullet shot contributes to a heart attack that ends up killing them. But they also had, carotid artery disease, et cetera, all kinds of other issues. Well, it was 5 years later, the person's health was bad and was declining. They were getting older in age. It was not foreseeable that shot would have caused the person's death 5 years later. That's another example of proximate cause. My examples aren't that great. Maybe I'll go into this a little bit later. But I think you get the point here, right? So you have to have the but-for cause and the proximate cause. You must have legal causation and proximate causation to prove that somebody died. And I do think here, if you buy the prosecution's theory of the case, where they say the knee was on the neck or the back, the knee led to the lack of oxygen, the lack of oxygen caused the death, I would say it was both but for, because if Chauvin's knee had not been on this individual's back, he would have lived. I'll get into this, okay, but for, okay, he would not have died if Chauvin's knee was not on his back, and also it was foreseeable that the knee on the back neck area would have killed Mr. Floyd. And the prosecution's experts, I think, did a pretty good job of connecting all of those dots. Now, let's talk about intervening causes. So if you have a superseding intervening cause, then that can also defeat liability or acquit someone, okay? So let's say that you stabbed someone and they were bleeding, but it wasn't so bad, all right, in the stomach, and then they're running to the hospital, okay, and then boom, they get hit by a bus. Is that person, is the person who stabbed guilty of the murder? Likely no, because what's called an intervening superseding cause came and killed that person. Now, the stabber is likely guilty of some sort of assault or some sort of serious crime, but would not be guilty of the death there because something else came in and played a larger role. A different cause killed that person. Now, the cause intervened, it intervened, and it was superseding because the bus could be tied directly to the death of the person. Boom, just flattened them, okay? So now we're going to look at the intervening causes here. Use that analogy, put that in your mind, and this is what the defense is getting at with the fentanyl, the methamphetamine, the pre-existing conditions. They're saying this was a superseding intervening cause. This is what actually killed George Floyd, not the knee on the back. And their experts witness, Dr. Fowler, supports that. And even, most of these other experts said that, fentanyl and drugs can affect respiration, or play a role, but they didn't believe, remember the contributing cause, they didn't believe that was the primary role in his death. However, Dr. Fowler supports that theory. Now, here's an interesting thing. I wonder if the defense will argue this. What about the other officers? What about the combined weight of the other officers? All right, were they the actual cause? Was it just a contributing cause? Would you look at those three officers in the gun analogy? Maybe all three of them caused the death, and therefore they are all responsible. Now, will any of these supersede the drug theory, the pre-existing heart conditions that George had, and the contribution of the other officers? Is that enough to supersede any guilt from Derek Chauvin? Okay. And I go back here to the cause of death, the restraint. I'm just sort of connecting the dots here. Now, will those other causes be enough to win the case for the defense? Now, the prosecution called 5 doctors who all attributed the death to hypoxia or lack of oxygen: Langenfeld, Tobin, Smock, Thomas, and Rich. And as far as the alternate causes, here's the interesting thing about the alternate causes. In my opinion, the 3 most credible doctors here, despite Dr. Tobin's very powerful, emotionally powerful testimony, are Dr. Langenfeld. He was the ER doctor, and the reason that Langenfeld and Baker are more credible is because they were the boots on the scene. This case ended up on their table. They weren't sought after in order to testify about it like those other doctors who were chosen by the prosecutors, or they came forward and volunteered like Tobin. So Langenfeld, ER doctor, this falls on his plate. That gives him credibility. He says cardiac arrest. Now, he did focus on hypoxia. Then you have Dr. Baker, who really did not say hypoxia. He also focused on cardiopulmonary, but he did point to the restraint in his original report. And finally, we have Dr. Fowler. Now, Dr. Fowler, I don't believe, is as credible as Langenfeld and Baker. However, I do believe he has more credibility than the other prosecution witnesses. Number one, he's the only witness, only doctor called by the defense, okay? And he presents an alternative theory. He says cardiac arrest caused by drugs and prior heart conditions. And if the jury accepts his theory as the most powerful one, it would create a superseding, intervening cause that would relieve Derek Chauvin of all liability in this case. And bonus points, if you notice who that is, the verdicts. I believe ultimately, now most of the doctors that came in were paid or volunteered, okay? But Langenfeld and Baker, in my opinion, will carry the day for the prosecution. If I was the prosecutor, I would focus very much on them. They both tie the restraints to the death of Mr. Floyd. Whether it's cardiac, pulmonary, or lack of breathing, they both tie the restraint. The restraint caused the hypoxia and or the lack of breathing. It's going to be tough to overcome. The prosecution brought in multiple other doctors who backed this up. However, Langenfeld and Baker, I believe, will carry the day. This issue, however, will be fascinating for the co-defendants, okay? For the co-defendants, Tao, Lane, and Kung, who were the other ones restraining Mr. Floyd. I can see a scenario because remember I told you about but for and proximate cause, where the officers who were closest to Mr. Floyd's neck and chest area, for them, the pressure they were placing on Mr. Floyd made it very foreseeable that he could possibly die. However, when you get to the officers in the back, I believe there was one who was restraining Mr. Floyd primarily around his upper legs and his lower leg area. Was it foreseeable that this man's restraints would cause the death of Mr. Floyd? I don't think so. I think that person has a much greater chance, and it's kind of funny to think about. It's almost too simple, but it's very logical. The person who was putting the most pressure on his neck and chest area is the most culpable, and as you move down the body, the culpability, the guilt, the amount of liability gets less and less and less, and that's that proximate cause analysis. Now, I thought it was interesting here, and so keep that in mind if we focus on the other trials, right? Chauvin is first, all right? But we're going to see the other ones too in the coming months and years. And I think whoever's at the end has the best chance of getting off. Chauvin, it looks like he's in the worst position because he's up near the head and neck area. Now, should the defense have called more doctors? Should they, because the prosecution called so many doctors, I think it would have been maybe beneficial for the defense to call at least one more doctor who would have agreed with Dr. Fowler. That's just my opinion. Now, remember, I told you, I think that Chauvin loses on this aspect of the trial, the causation. But in the next video, I'm going to talk in more depth about intent. I think intent is where Chauvin has an advantage, and that goes to, the rules and the procedures, okay, and what he was doing, why he was doing what he was doing at the time, and whether he attended this. And that can go, and remember, he's charged with second degree, I can't remember exactly everything here in Minnesota, a second degree homicide, a third degree homicide, and then a manslaughter charge. And the intent is going to go to those three cases, okay? And I think that's where Chauvin's attorney really has a very good chance of defending his client. And I think because of the causation issues here and the powerful medical testimony that he's going to be found guilty of one of these as causing the death of Mr. Floyd, but it's going to matter what his intent, what his state of mind was when he caused the death as to which degree of homicide or manslaughter he is convicted of. I hope you all enjoyed this episode, a little bit longer than usual, of Joe the Lawyer. You enjoyed my analysis. If you like these more in-depth videos, please let me know. If you like this format, I want all criticism and comments, all constructive, fair criticism and comments, please bring it my way. If you like my content, like, subscribe, comment, to share. I'm Joe the Lawyer. Thank you very much. Check out my Patreon. Subscribe to my email list. I love you guys. Peace out.